Shabop, shabop. Welcome to the Free Mom Podcast, you guys.
Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's
Well, we're back again. So we're building
Back
a slow case, very, very slow, for just trying to lay out what we're doing. You know, where do we go from here was the first episode we had, right? I think that's what we called it. And we had those three kind of ways. Do you remember what they were? I'm giving you a pop quiz here, babe.
Gosh,
yep,
babe.
putting you on the spot.
I just got off work. I'm tired.
She did get off work. A full day of
what's the
teaching. A
questions?
full day of teaching. So we had the three options for where do we go to here.
Okay.
Maybe I'll give you a
yeah.
hint.
Okay.
The first one is separatist.
Pietism.
There you go. Do you remember the second one?
Defensive something?
Yeah. Evangelicalism. And the third one.
Kuyperianism.
There you go. Reformed Kuyperianism.
There you go. See, I do pay attention.
No, I know you do, babe. And you're doing great. She is like teaching
Walk
all
through the door
day, and
with groceries.
she comes into this podcast. I'm calling it a studio. It's like, you know, kitchen, living room. We just set this
For
thing
real.
up down here in our great friends, the Damon's basement, and
Yes, we
she
love the
comes in the
Damons.
door, literally starts the dinner. And I say, okay, come over here. She's like, what's the topic? I said, I'm not even going to tell you. I'm just going to throw you in the fire.
That's how we roll, y'all.
That's how we roll, y'all.
I roll. I promise to roll how he rolls. Go ahead.
That's right. So
All right.
just trying to lay out a kind of a long case over this season of where do we go from here, right? And given like clear options, not trying to badmouth the separatist pietists, and also like not even knowing for sure where do we land, like as far as are we more on the defensive evangelical side? Are we going to go like and really just dig in and say, okay, we're doing this Reformed Kuyperianism thing, which is, you know, quite a unique take for us if you grew up in evangelical background, because Reformed Kuyperianism, it really does try to apply all of Christ for all of life. And you know, they tend to be like post-millennial in their view of the future. They are like, yeah, we really want to like have Christian government. We want to have Christian schools. You know, there's an emphasis on really like the kingdom of God really coming and being salt and light in a particular kind of way, whereas defensive evangelicalism is more kind of content to keep the sacred secular split and kind of live in the sacred space. And then like we work in the secular space with according to their principles, but we try to keep them from going too far in crazy directions. So most of us at best are kind of like in that camp. Right. But we also have seen how influential the pietism has become. And the dangers of that mixed with antinomianism and all that, you know, having this disdain for Christian law and in the Old Testament and how to apply those scriptures, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a rough, quick sketch of where we come. I would encourage you, if you haven't gotten a chance to listen through those, I wouldn't say we're building a systematic case, but semi-systematic, trying to build one on the other. Last couple of weeks, we've been dealing with some responses to kind of some of the stuff we've been highlighting, where we're actually naming some names because you really have to say, okay, what's going on the evangelical establishment, which is sometimes called Big Eva. Why are these guys like carrying water for progressivism, political progressivism, and even the theological left? And why do they seem to be really, when they go hard, it's against the conservatives. But when they kind of like nuance things to death, it's sort of in favor to prop up more the left-leaning approach to the cultural moment. So we felt like it was necessary to point that out because many of these folks are our go-tos. Like they have been our go-tos over the years. Like, you know, you read the Tim Keller books or, you know, you point to John Piper or Russell Moore. And we just wanted to like kind of let you know where those guys are standing on these issues so that at least you know that there's another side and that we need to critique some of the assumptions that are behind what those guys are doing in this cultural moment that can seem surprising on the surface until you dig a little deeper. And actually, in many cases, it's consistent with their theology as it's been for years. We just haven't known. So
I noticed. Okay.
yeah, so that's where we're at with that. Now, what I want to begin to do in a couple weeks from now is build the positive case. Like, okay, so where do we go if we're gonna do the defensive evangelical thing? There's still some stuff we can do on that, or if we're gonna like join with the Reformed Kuyperians and maybe even the charismatic Seven Mountainers. There are some things that we can begin to do and engage in on that end as well. We need to discuss like when is resistance. We're the Canada issue right now.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
We have Canadian brothers and sisters. Samuel Say, who's been on the show a few times. I just saw something he posted earlier, I don't know, in the week, where he was saying he had been in Ohio, I think, for 3 weeks visiting his fiance, and his heart was breaking though for Canada. He said it wasn't even like being in a different country, but a different world.
Wow.
Like how when he compared it to like what's really going on in Canada right now with the vaccine mandates and everything.
So crazy.
Interestingly enough, there's another situation I heard about. I won't give too many details because there may be some legal ramifications, but let me just keep it real vague. But somebody that I know received a call from somebody in Canada saying, hey, if we were to make it out of this nation, would you be able to provide our family with housing for an extended period of time? They don't think they can even get out because they haven't had the vaccine. And if they pass some sort of law this week, then they're going to be put in a position where they're probably going to have to try to flee the country.
That's crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Oh, these are the times.
These are the times.
These are the times. That's crazy. Yeah.
The mystery of it is, why did America stop? Because we know that they're in the same vein as, they're in the Great Reset.
There was a push to
the World Economic Forum. Like,
Interesting.
It's not like Trudeau's on this stuff on his own. Like the Biden regime and all these guys are in the same camp when it comes to this. So and even over in the UK, Boris, and it's like, why did they pull back all of a sudden certain countries, but then yet Canada and Australia still going hard like they are? That's the mystery. And I don't have any thoughts on that yet or any insight into that, but I think time will tell. Like, hopefully we'll get to see behind the scenes, like at some point, maybe not, but something happened, and it's never what it looks like on the surface right now, but oftentimes we can't see beyond to really know. But that was the push. That is the Great Reset playbook. Like, what's going on in Canada is where they wanted it to take it all around the world. At least that's my best understanding from reading their own materials and what they wanted to do with these vaccine and lockdown and just the statist philosophy and the kind of approach to life and government that they want to create is this massive government that basically, for our own good, right, quote unquote, can kind of reach into the family. It can reach into the church. It can reach into our health. Like, government becomes this all-encompassing totalitarian thing, although they wouldn't call it totalitarian, but it is, like when you see how they cash it out. So that's what's going on. So, we're praying for our Canadian brothers and sisters, man. It's like pastors were getting arrested a year ago for holding services. And now, you see where it kind of goes. This is funny too. Let's see if I can pull this up just to give you a little bit of news updates. So this is the Washington Post. I want you to hear the kind of propaganda that comes from this. I'm going to read this to you. Don't even look at it yet. You don't do cheat sheet. I want you to hear it with fresh ears. So the Washington Compost, as I like to call it. This is what they said about the trucker convoy. The primarily white supporters of the Freedom Convoy argue that pandemic mandates infringe upon their constitutional rights to freedom. You can already see how they're framing it, right? The notion of quote unquote freedom was historically and remains intertwined with whiteness.
Oh boy. As
historian Tyler Stovall, historian that you pull in the scholar here, has argued. And this is what they put: the belief that one's entitlement to freedom is a key component of white supremacy.
Excuse me?
The belief that one's entitlement to freedom is a key component of white supremacy. This explains why the Freedom Convoy members see themselves as entitled to freedom, no matter the public health consequences to those around them.
Wow. Okay. They're playing the...
Yeah.
white supremacist thing.
Yeah. So that's, I mean,
Interesting.
it's funny. It's amazing to me that they can still use that card. It must be effective with
so
some people.
played out,
I can't
yeah.
imagine anybody taking that seriously. Like, we should be reading that publicly and like gut laughing, belly laughing. I mean, it's just, it's that doesn't even really deserve a response. I should play I don't have a laugh track here. If I had a laugh track, I'd play it.
But yeah, I think, unfortunately, that I know that there are people who believe that kind of propaganda and will like shame the freedom fighters that are standing.
Yes.
That's crazy.
So that lets you know.
Yeah.
Remember when we read The Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis? It's a perfect example of, he just really captures how they hire people as propagandists to promote stuff like that in the mainstream media.
Prior to the event even happening, to put it out there right as it happens, to sway how the minds on how to interpret what's going on. It's really crazy how he was able to have that kind of foresight. Yeah,
man. So you got these truckers, many of them, like, I saw this lady too that had donated $50, or donated an amount to the Freedom Convoy. And she was just, lower to middle class woman. They found that out and seized her bank account in Canada.
Wow.
She's not able to get to her funds. So this is how it works. Like, this is like your country on leftism. It's Marxism. It's not interested in
Marxism.
in freedom. It's the opposite of what we would believe we have as pre-political rights, as free citizens, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that they got, that was grounded in the kind of a combination of the Magna Carta and the Mayflower Compact, both of those highly informed by the Bible, biblical principles of understanding, like the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder, because life is a human right based in the imago Dei, the image of God. Thou shalt not steal, because property is a human right based in the image of God. These things, these violations you cannot violate because human beings are image bearers, pre-political, and the government is supposed to get out of the way and basically uphold those basic fundamental rights. And when you have Marxism, the government becomes God. And so this Canadian thing is that, and when you do that, you have to propagandize people so they don't rise up in masses, right? You have to tell them, oh, these are crazy white supremacists. We experienced that when we were at the January 6th thing. Exactly. Same playbook. Sure. It's such a funny playbook. Once you see it, it's like, seriously, that's the card you're going to play here, is white supremacy. Funny enough, Sam went out there to part of that convoy, I think, to be a part of it. I believe so.
Okay.
I'm going to try to get him on the show and get him to talk about that in the future. But
jeez,
it's really funny, man. And it's like, it's real easy for us right now because it's not going on here. Like,
that's
they
what I
backed
was
off.
just thinking, that we should all be in, just not panic. There's not need to fear panic, but we should all be in uproar. Like, this is down the road from us. Yeah. This is happening right across the border, not across the pond.
Yep.
Well, there too, a little bit, but just so close.
Yep.
And it's just so close.
Honestly, as I'm even thinking about it now, we should be doing stuff in solidarity with them. Like, we should be out,
because they're inspiring. We don't know what to do sometimes, but they have united and stood their ground, and they are making changes. And I think they are showing the powers that be that they're fighting for their freedom. They're willing to give it all up. Yeah. Because they're trying to make them give it all up anyway. Yeah. So it's like, well, let's fight.
Yeah, man. Isn't that crazy? It reminds me too that when we screenshots I took of I think it was the African American Museum in the Smithsonian, where they were talking about what whiteness was. Remember that? Yeah. And they put things under whiteness, the Protestant work ethic, objectivity, the scientific method. Yeah. It's just anything that was really birthed out of the Christian framework. All that is just labeled whiteness because it's part of the hegemony, supposedly, that oppresses people of color and being on time, that kind of thing. So it's just, you have to understand the worldview at play. Otherwise you'll be bamboozled. Like, what are these guys talking about? And maybe even fear, like, oh, is this some, instantiation of white supremacy, feeling threatened, so they're back, no, it's full of all that narrative. And I, not even talking about whether or not the Freedom Convoy is a good method to protest. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I've heard some people critique and say, well, this is probably not the wisest way to do it. I'm not even getting in that debate for now. But what I am saying is what they are fighting for is worth fighting for.
Yes.
And what these guys are saying about them is just clearly gut laugh level propaganda. So that's our little news tidbit for the day. But what I want to pop on here is kind of one more. This is just before we build the positive. It's one more like thing that's typically brought forth in the church, in the evangelical world, as that often acts as a reason for us not to get involved.
Okay.
And oddly enough, it's weird because I've actually, this very thing I'm going to reference, I'm not going to say who it is. It's a guy I really respect. It's a pastor who is involved in some political things like he should be. But then on the other hand, like he puts forth this theology that seems to run against being involved.
Okay.
And I think even though thankfully, I think he is inconsistent in that way, unfortunately, it does have the effect for a lot of people in the pew to feel satisfied in their passivity.
Okay.
And it's sometimes it's called pilgrim theology. Sometimes it's called like, we're aliens and strangers just passing through. It's that idea. And so I want to pull this up and just talk a little bit about that because I think it's worth it here. So I'm going to start reading. Now I'm going to read this to you. I want you to hear it with fresh ears too, just like they're hearing it. So
listen up.
this person said, this is back on February 10th, just because it sounds good and powerful doesn't make it biblical. True, right? Here's what comes out after that. This isn't your home. Shall I remind you that the Bible calls you aliens and strangers in this world? But you've made this your home. That is why you have become so offended, so angry, so unfocused on the task that God has given you. We are called to be ambassadors for Christ, to be his representative to a world who needs Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Now, depending on how you tease those, this is me talking again.
Sure.
Depending on how you tease those words out, there's a lot of truth in that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I want to bring this, because this is a little more tricky than some of them that's straightforward. But what I think you want to notice in there, these are the questions you want to ask of this. When he says this isn't your home, what does that mean? Is he saying that the spiritual realm, the heavenly realm, is our home? Because that's often the way we talk in evangelicals. That's the way we think. And there is an element of truth to that. When he also says we are aliens and strangers in this world, what does he mean by that? And what implications does that have for how we engage culture and politics? Right?
Yeah.
Because if you mean that in one way, which is the typical way people mean it, that means we're just passing through. Like, why would you get involved in the village affairs if you're kind of just a passer through, right? Okay. This isn't your home. You're visiting this little town for 2 weeks. You're not going to run for mayor or, just passing through. So back to what he's saying here. He said it was Paul that reminded us in 2 Corinthians 6, 4-10, that as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way by great endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, the Holy Spirit, genuine love, by truthful speech, the power of God with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, through honor and dishonor, through slander and praise. We are treated as impostors and yet are true, as unknown and yet well known, as dying and behold we live, as punished and yet not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor, yet making many rich, as having nothing, yet possessing everything. And then this pastor goes on, we have forgotten the humble man, the humility of our great leaders, and the forever reminder of Ephesians 6:12 that says we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. Ephesians 6:17-20. And take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. If you have become, this is the pastor talking again, if you have become hostile, if you have become lost in your anger towards a tyrannical world system, never forget the man Paul. Who was his tyrannical leader? Nero. Yet Paul stood faithful, humble, in chains because he understood this was not his world. He was a reflection of his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So far, again, like there's a lot of truth in that. I think you could understand where he's coming from on this. But what's the impression that you get hearing that? That what should we be about? What should we be doing?
I don't know. Is he saying, don't get angry, we're just passing through? If you've gotten to that point where you're angry, you're lost. Is that what he's saying?
It does have that hue, right? And so yeah. What else you got?
That it shouldn't matter that much to you, I guess. It shouldn't you shouldn't care to the point of your emotions getting, I don't know.
Right. Well, so I think first of all, is getting angry about great injustice bad? That's a question that we would want to ask, right?
Anger, don't sin.
Yeah. So I think we won't have time to go through all the realms now, but that would be a good question to ask. Like, when is that anger out of order? When is it justified biblically? When is it right? Like, because you see Jesus, right, cleansing the temple. He often gets angry with different things that are going on. Paul often gets angry. Sometimes he goes on a tirade, and he's the very one often writing, lay aside anger, malice, envy, all these kinds of things. And in your anger, do not sin. So I don't think the goal should be stoicism in the face of great injustice.
Okay.
But what he said here before that, getting lost in your anger, there is a place you can get to in this kind of stuff.
Sure, you lose it, your mind. You're no good.
You become obsessed with the evil in the world, and it makes you to where you're ineffective. Like, because at the same time, it does talk about rejoicing always, right? Being joyful.
Yeah, and there's a place for self-control in the face of darkness, where you could be useful and have your clear mindset should you need to make a decision.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I get the dangers of what he's trying to ward off here.
Sure. Okay.
Especially in this world that he's speaking to, of like the red pill world, when you start to become aware of the deep evil in this world, the deep state and this World Economic Forum. Sometimes it can be so overwhelming that you become obsessed in a way that clouds your vision of the mission of God and the sovereignty of God and those things. And I think that is something we got to be careful of.
True.
Right?
Who's at the set? Whatever you can do in anger, you could do better without anger.
Dallas he used to say that.
So there's that. Okay.
Yeah. But I do want to make a place for righteous anger that's biblical. And in this case, even applied, it's got to be prioritized properly.
Yes. Okay.
So anyways, he says, you want to fight? Go ahead. But be reminded, my friend, he goes through Matthew 26 here, where Jesus said to him, friend, do what you came to do. Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand, drew his sword. And he's talking about the part where, Peter basically cuts off, a sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And then John 18, Jesus answered, my kingdom, and listen to this again, what he's quoting in the kind of the argument here.
Okay,
John 18:36, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. So these are scriptures need to be wrestled with. So what is he saying here? I think the implication you might draw so far is that, listen, people come to persecute us, let it happen, right? Is that kind of, I
think so.
Yeah.
I glean from that.
What you pick up. Yeah. So he goes on here, 1 Peter 2:11-12. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from passions of the flesh, which war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. I say, I encourage, I call you to follow what Paul says to Timothy. Before I go to the Timothy passage, I think that's where we get the sojourners and exiles, pilgrims and strangers, sometimes different translations. 2 Timothy here says, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, remove, rebuke, and exhort. Going on here to, and interestingly enough, he ends here with Matthew 28:18-20. He says, "And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." And this is how he ends the pastor. He says, "Now go into the world and preach the good news of Jesus Christ. Go be awkward." And so that mixed with other things, I've listened to him speak on this. So I do know that what he's implying here is part of his messaging often is we need to be about the gospel in the face of everything that's going on. We're pilgrims passing through, go out and preach the gospel. And he'll typically define that in a more narrow sense.
Okay.
Yet on the other side, he's involved somewhat in these political things, in the cultural war. Now I'm thankful he is, but I think if you buy into his argument here, and you try to be consistent with that, then you would do what the pietists say. So I think his argument inevitably leads back to that separatist pietist mindset. Because if what was meant by those scriptures he quoted is what he thinks they meant, then you would not, again, like why any kind of cultural fighting and political fighting is going to get in the way of our one duty, which is to save souls, right?
Yeah.
And preach the gospel, quote unquote, defined as saving souls, the soteriology, the soteria element of the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so this, I think, we'll often encounter this type of thinking in the church. And it's sometimes harder to see it as separatist pietism when the people saying that are involved in politics, but we have to be aware in those moments that actually what they're preaching here is inconsistent with their actions. Okay. And so we need to ask, like, if he's right, then we need to be separatist pietists. Like if that is the proper interpretation of the biblical narrative that we're just passing through, and that we basically need to just be concerned with souls, then we need to be pietists.
Gotcha.
Make sense?
Yeah.
What say you?
You know, I would love his answer to what would he say in the face of things that prevent him from doing that, going and preaching the gospel in all nations. Would he at that point say, okay, this is a mandate from God, we need to preach? But what if there comes a day like Canada, you are forbidden from... Right.
I'm going to tell you...
He would probably say, okay, just take the punishment, or what would he say to that? You know, or if, you know, the thing about anger, you know, what if someone harmed a dear loved one, and I don't wish that on anybody, but someone that is, you know, at what point, how far do you take that? Yeah. How far do you interpret that? And I get it. People say it in regards to politics, but there are times when, I mean, now everything's political. Yeah. Everything. Yeah. Well, that's what happens. How you raise your kids. When statism happens, they subsume everything under civil government. Okay. So then everything becomes political. Okay. Because now it's under the rule directly of the civil government. And so you can't get away from that. You can't hide from it. But I will say this. I believe knowing a little bit and following him enough, he would say anything that prevents the gospel from going forth, then you would need to resist. And he would appeal to the apostles' activity to ground that viewpoint. Okay. But that does raise a good question. Does that mean then that all those scriptures he read have a caveat? Clearly they do. Even so they're not meant to be carte blanche, resist at no cost, or don't resist no matter what. And it's not meant to say like we simply are passing through and so God's will be done. And if they tell me not to preach the gospel, I'm not going to preach the gospel. That's not what he would say. Okay. So this is the part and parcel of separatist pietists. Like even like John Piper, we did that episode on him. He would say like, you obey the government, you obey the authorities unless they specifically tell you not to preach the gospel. Interesting. Okay. Right.
So that's
Preach.
typically,
So preaching is the only
yes, like that's the only thing
time to
that,
resist.
according to them, that biblically they would have the justification for resisting.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. And so I think they would, again, you do see that clearly in the book of Acts. Like you see them resisting when they tell them not to preach. Who shall we obey, God or man? Right.
Yeah.
But is that the only thing? That's the question. Like, why make it that narrow? Is that the only thing? And that's where we have to study the whole view of the Bible. But I think the thing that underlies that is this whole idea that we're just passing through, and our mission is restricted to the gospel, which defined as the soteria. That's the key to keep in mind. If that's the case, then we shouldn't be involved in any of these other things. They're just going to get in the way. Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to give you another listener feedback thing. I'll keep the name private.
Okay.
It was a good discussion I had on our, by the way, if you are not on Telegram, Free Mind, we are on Telegram as well. And sometimes we get into little discussions on there, which is great. But this person said, I have a question. Which view, 1, 2, or 3, this is going back to the Where Do We Go From Here episode. Okay. So separatist pietism, defensive evangelicalism, and reformed Kuyperianism. Which of those would support believers involved in politics? And this person said, and how does that align with what John MacArthur teaches about political involvement and not supporting a theocracy? I know we're not supposed to have a theocracy, but I struggle with understanding how we are active politically as believers and yet not supporting a theocracy of some kind. Maybe my definitions need help. I hope my question makes sense.
That's a good question.
It's a good question.
Very good question.
So I say, great question. So points 2 and 3 would allow for political involvement, right? Both defensive evangelicalism as well as reformed Kuyperianism would allow for and encourage political involvement to some degree. It's just how they would get involved. Defensive evangelicals would do it on the basis of kind of their secular principles. We would argue against abortion on the basis of being consistent with human life, stuff like that. Reformed Kuyperians would say, you're wicked and you need to repent. Jesus is king, submit. Even in the public square, they
John
might
the
say something like
Baptist
that.
Yeah.
Okay. No, but they would also make arguments like that, but they wouldn't have any problem using the Bible as an authoritative source, even in public discourse. I continued on in this answer. I said, points 2 and 3 would allow for political involvement. 3, I think, offers a more coherent view of why we should be involved holistically. But 2 works as well by saying, quote, we still have to live here, unquote, and we should at least be salt and light where we can. I've heard from a gentleman who went to Masters Academy. So Masters Academy, I think it's Academy, Masters Seminary maybe, which is John MacArthur's school out in California. I heard that that they said there was a professor there that they teach from more of an Anabaptist position, which is much more in line with the first option of separatist pietism. So John MacArthur is, like, his theological viewpoint is way more in line with the pietism option out of those 3 as defined by Jerry Longshore. That
kind of past couple of years. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So
interesting. Okay.
MacArthur did well, I said, in my view, by standing up to the totalitarianism in California last year when many other pastors would not. But in general, I would disagree with his position on the Christians' involvement in politics, as it is way too much in the pietistic realm. Wayne Grudem responds to his view in Grudem's book on politics. He interacts with John MacArthur directly in that viewpoint. And so I linked that book. I said, so before we leave that, I just want to point out, so like you said, John MacArthur did stand up. Why did he do that? Because he felt like what the government was doing was running against basic church functionality. And so for him, that crossed that line. Like in that same world as like preaching the gospel. If you're coming in and you're stopping us from preaching the gospel, then I've got to stand and make a stand on that.
So with that first pastor, that first article, will he agree with MacArthur?
I think he would. Okay. And here's the interesting part. I just found out listening to something last night that he's a big fan of Masters and maybe even went there. Cool. And so that it's starting to line up like the ideology and where, like, kind of where people land. It's just good to to know like
Their
the paradigm
journey,
that they're operating on.
Okay,
because when they use those passages, they're going to be using it propping up that ideology, which is fine. But we have to ask, like, do those passages mean what they saying they mean? And then are there other passages that would challenge that overall paradigm? And how do you systematize those together in a coherent framework that does the fairest job of upholding all of them, even if they're in tension, right?
That's really good.
So that's how you do, like, basically systematic theology is you're taking all the verses on a particular topic and you're saying, because the assumption there is that God is a God of truth. And also that the Bible doesn't contradict itself, because truth means that its opposite can't be true as well. So truth should be coherent. It should all work together, and it's not contradictory. Therefore, the Bible has to interpret the Bible, and when you interpret it properly, it will fit together, even if there are tensions.
Okay.
I said, as far as theocracy is concerned, on the one hand, I would agree that theocracy, quote unquote, understood in the typical way is not the way to go. However, the Reformed Kuyperian guys like Jared Longshore, Douglas Wilson, etc., make a good case that it's not whether you'll have a theocracy, but which theocracy you will have.
That's good.
The claim, and so this person was getting at that, like they were right. They were like, I don't understand. How can it not be a theocracy?
That's good.
But what they're saying is like, even the secular God that we're serving now is a theocracy of sorts. They claim that there is always a God of the state, quote unquote, a God, little g. So you should be active insofar as possible to make sure that it's the true God. How this works out requires some unpacking. So the upshot of the episode is that no matter where we land, I would argue that it needs to be in at least 2 or 3, but not 1. Like 2 and 3 can give us some resources to work with. I think 3 is more okay, fits better. But at least be 2. So, that's all I want to share on that. But what I want to go to now, there's Andrew Sandlin. We played some of his stuff a couple weeks back. He does a great job of really synthesizing a biblical worldview, understanding kind of the Gnosticism, this idea that heaven good, earth bad, is not really biblical. Also, the pietism, he really works against that and tries to bring some clear understanding to what do those passages mean that seem on the surface maybe to suggest that we shouldn't get tangled up in earthly affairs. So we're going to play through that and just go through a little bit of this here. So here we go.
My talk today is titled The Dangers of Pilgrim Theology. Perhaps the most popular Christian book in English, apart from the Bible itself, is Pilgrim's Progress, an extended allegory written by the great Baptist John Bunyan. It's a story of a young man, appropriately named Christian, who by God's grace loses his burden and is pressed by God's grace throughout this world.
So interesting opener, right? To come against the Pilgrim's Progress, but I think he's going to explain it had a lot of good things. So don't turn it off yet, and yell heresy.
If it's your favorite book,
right? No, we actually I love the concept of that book. The movie was really good. The little cartoon movie too. It sounded like this brother just ran up the stairs too. I don't know what's going on, but he's breathing heavy. I hope he's all right. Here we go though.
Through its sin and temptations, toils and snares, until he crosses the great river of death and gets to the celestial city. And it's a remarkable and poignant and in many ways very biblical account of what the Christian life is all about. Unfortunately, that word in the title pilgrim can be a little misleading, just as aspects of the allegory itself, of the book itself, can be misleading. Part of the problem is our misunderstanding of that word pilgrim as used in the Bible in English and related to words aliens and strangers and so on. In Hebrews chapter 11, for example, we read of Abraham and the patriarchs as being strangers, pilgrims, aliens, looking for a city, a heavenly city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And immediately we're conditioned to think when it says heavenly city of perhaps the intermediate state, or a Platonic notion of a world far, far away, a non-material world, this world having been completely burned up and destroyed, and living forever with the Lord, perhaps in disembodied spirits, but eventually getting a body back, though perhaps we don't know why. That essentially is Platonic, or Plato's and ancient Greek dualism as it has been imported into the Christian faith, even though it's been pervasively received.
So does it make sense so far what he's saying there? It's like,
A little bit.
he's basically saying Pilgrim's Progress, very biblical, but it gives the impression that like this celestial city is kind of the goal, and it's can be understood, or often is understood, as kind of this heavenly Platonic realm. And he also references talking about that this passage in Hebrews where I think he said it was Abraham that was a pilgrim and stranger looking for that heavenly city. And he said what we automatically do when we read something like that is we interpret it through this kind of Platonic framework, this sacred, secular, Gnostic kind of thing where he was on earth, but he was really looking to go to heaven.
The Bible uses the term pilgrim and similar terms like alien or strangers. It means those who are accompanying temporarily with people who are not of their family, people from a different nation. When the Bible speaks of Abraham, for example, Isaac and Jacob and so on as pilgrims, it does not mean, emphatically, that they are pilgrims in God's good created earth and are looking only to escape this earth to go to heaven when they die. It does mean, however, that they are pilgrims within this world being interpreted and understood as the satanic system, presently governed by evil. That's how John, the Apostle John in the New Testament, often uses that word, both in the gospel and in his epistles.
Does that make sense?
I think so.
When he's saying often in John's writing in the gospel and the epistles, when you see the word world,
It's more
cosmos is the Greek word typically translated world. You have to know what he means by that. If you interpret that as the material earth,
okay,
like you're reading something in there that's not there. Like he means the carnal, the structures of the system of the satanically run order of things.
Gotcha.
So you can be a pilgrim and a stranger with regard to that system.
That's good. Okay, thanks.
When he says, do not love the world, the cosmos, he doesn't mean don't love the material world. I mean, after all, God said it was very good. God loves his own world. It doesn't mean the people within the world. After all, we read in John 3:16, for God so loved the world.
Yikes.
That means the people within the world, and probably also implies his creation. When John says do not love the world, he means the present system. World is interpreted as the present evil system under satanic influence. It is that world in which we are strangers and pilgrims and aliens, not God's world. So then, to maybe bring it down a little bit, we are called not to be at home in the sinful world, the world of unbelief, the world of rebellion, the world of sexual deviation and perversion, the world of pride, the world of prayerlessness, the world of hatred for one another, the world of abortion and pornography, and I could go on and on. That world, of course, is the world in which we are called to be strangers, pilgrims, and aliens. But we are to be at home and not to be strangers in God's world of creation and his kingdom that has invaded this world in Jesus Christ. It's for this reason that pilgrim theology, a pilgrimage, as it is usually understood among Christians, is so dangerous. Because if we embrace that view, we get the idea that God is not especially interested in human history.
You see what the connection there?
Yeah.
Like if you take that seriously, we're just passing. If you interpret pilgrims and strangers as though we're pilgrims and strangers in the material world, and our real home is in heaven, and that's defined as the immaterial realm and the Platonic realm where we'll forever be and be, then it does by implication mean, man, God doesn't care much about this kind of stuff. And that automatically then everything else follows from that. Like, again, full-time ministry becomes, if you're serious about God, go into that because that's what really matters.
I see.
Even the person that was talking about their experience at Masters, they said they would talk to professors. They were like, oh, don't go into politics. It's just, that's a meaningless waste of time. So you need to settle, like, through good exegesis, he's summarizing it here, but you have to look at those terms, like he said, world, and be careful not to read it into that. You have to look at that passage in Hebrews.
Exegesis.
Yes, and apply the proper hermeneutical tools to understand that. Yeah. And then, not to say that John MacArthur doesn't know that. Like he's a smart guy. He understands exegesis, and that's where you have to kind of debate it out, like, how do you best understand the scriptural data? And I think he gets it wrong, but it is important to go through that process. Okay. And that I think would eliminate a lot of the misunderstandings for a lot of people.
He's not interested in redeeming this world and creation, despite the fact that Paul plainly says that the creation itself is moaning, travailing for its own redemption. It was not cursed because of anything it did. That is the non-human creation, but of course Adam and Eve who sinned, and we, born into this created world, who continue sinning. But thank God, because of Christ's death on the cross and his glorious resurrection and his ascension and his present session and reign, little by little this world is being redeemed. It was definitively redeemed at the cross and resurrection, but it's being progressively redeemed now by the preaching of the gospel and the power of the Spirit and the people of God under the triune God's authority as they obey. But if we see the real evil as the materiality of the present world, if we see the real evil as food and politics and sex and art and education, and if we think that these things are at best distractions from the very important things,
that's the key, right? That phrase is perfect. If we see that as at best distractions from the really important things, then you'll have what we currently have in American Christianity by and large.
Okay.
Like simply thinking high thoughts, internal thoughts about God with no reference to the material world. We've embraced a dangerous form of pilgrim theology. Our pilgrimage as the people of God is the pilgrimage away from the sinful world and more fully into God's created world and a restoration of that created and good material world.
So if you understand Pilgrim's Progress like that, like not just passing through the material world to get to the celestial city of heaven when you die, but increasingly coming into God's world.
Yeah.
Having our marriage line up with God's design for marriage.
Come on, that's really good.
Having kids, raising kids to be in the admonition of the Lord, educating them, be involved in Christian art, redeeming everything that God gives you say over. That is passing into the celestial city in this sense.
That's really good.
One reason we know that's the case is because of the end of Revelation, when we read about the inception of the consummate state, the eternal state. It's not depicted as our dying and going to heaven. It's depicted as heaven, which is the temporary abode of God. Remember, heaven's not eternal. Was not eternal in the past. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens were just the leading heaven. The top heaven was just a place for God to dwell, to relate to the earth. But in Revelation, we read that these heavens come down and merge with the earth, a newly renovated earth. In the book of Peter, it's a burned up earth, not burned up to be destroyed, but purged.
So that's an important point there. And we'll talk more about that down the road, but that has to do with kind of eschatology and how you envision the new heavens and the new earth.
I love it. If you want to grow in your confidence in knowing what you believe and why you believe it, if you want to ground your faith in biblical Christianity and step into who God has called you to be, I want to tell you about a great program put on by Impact 360, and it's called Propel. Propel is a 1-week transformational leadership and discipleship experience where high school students gather together to be grounded in a biblical worldview as they learn how to follow Jesus, have a godly influence, learn how to disciple their peers, and boldly live out their faith in their daily lives. So they're having 2 sessions this summer. The first one is June 19th through the 25th, and the second one is June 26th through July 2nd. These programs fill up really quickly, and I promise you, you will not be disappointed. So we'll put the link below if you're interested in looking into it, and we'll see you this summer.
Likely that passage is actually specifically referring to God's judgment in AD 70, if you look at the passage of the Old Testament. But we could also add that this resurrected earth is also burned in the sense that it has been purged of evil. So that is the earth, the world, and the heavens, the new heavens and the new earth that everything is pointing toward. And it'll be very tactile.
So that's something that sometimes gets lost, I think, in popular Christianity is really all the eschatology views end with new heavens and new earth, where it's transformed physicality.
Okay.
It's not like a platonic realm in the future. And so like what that it would be in any of the systems is an intermediate state. And so, that will probably come as a surprise to people, but yeah, like whether you're a post-millennialist, a premillennialist, an amillennialist, they all converge back to at the end after the great judgment that new heavens and new earth will be created and resurrected bodies. Like your soul or spirit will be rejoined with a resurrected body like Christ's resurrected body was. He was the first fruits. And so he could be touched, he could eat, it's a transformed physicality. And so there is an intermediate state in which you're disembodied. Seventh-day Adventists would call it soul sleep. They wouldn't think that there is that disembodied state. They would just say basically you sleep until the final resurrection.
Oh boy. Okay.
But most denominations would hold to be absent from the body is to be present with Christ means something like some kind of awareness, like you would have almost in a dream, but it would be real.
Oh my
where
gosh.
You're present in heaven with us. And there are interesting near-death experience stories that people have noted. J.P. Moreland has a lot on that about people just having these. It's worth like looking into and reading sometime. But anyways, that would be the intermediate state according to Christian theology, not the final state.
Okay.
And so it's good to remember that like transformed physicality, the new heavens and new earth is the final state.
Be very fleshy. God has made us not to be disembodied, but to be bodied beings. And we are less than beings, full beings, if we're disembodied. For this reason, I want to encourage you as I close, not to look at this created world as a world you're just passing through, because your treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. Our final treasures are laid up in the consummate eternal state, but that will be here on a renovated earth, and we will bring our cultural work, our faithfulness to the Lord, and godly art and godly education and godly politics, more importantly, godly families, godly churches, into this eternal state. So beware of pilgrim theology. This is the Lord's world. The earth is the Lord's and all of its fullness, and he's extending his kingdom in it. I'm P. Andrew Sandlin, founder and president of the Center for...
So yeah,
wow, I love that.
Isn't that interesting?
The earth is the Lord's.
Yeah. And the fullness thereof, and where it's not an escapist thing. Even those passages. So if you were to take the time and go back to those passages we read at the beginning, in their context, you would understand. So one example would be when Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." What he didn't mean was, "My kingdom is not for this world." He meant it doesn't derive its power and authority from this world, as it is in its fallen state. His authority and power and rule comes from heaven for this world and beyond.
So good.
And so like how you understand my kingdom is not of this world will have many effects, like the kind of John MacArthur way.
Wow,
They would
that's
say
huge.
like, it has nothing to do with this world. And so basically we don't need to be involved with trying to Christianize politics or anything like that. That's just a distraction at best, maybe even harmful. Whereas I do believe, having studied that passage, pretty decently, I think that like Sandlin definitely holds what the point of view that I'm saying, and he argues for it well, that Jesus doesn't have to pick up knives, swords, and, in current day doesn't have to do bombs or bio warfare, because that he's not doing things according to the principles of this fallen world.
So good.
He, through the power of the kingdom, through like centered on transformed hearts, it's the leaven of the kingdom that's supposed to leaven everything in the earth and bring this progressive redemption ultimately, where he will come back and defeat death as the final enemy. And there will be that return, and there will be that final judgment, and we won't see perfection on this side. That's not the idea, but the idea is real salt and real light, like impacting not just individual hearts and thoughts about God, but our social structures, our relationships, even the way that we govern our churches, or we govern our cities, or we govern the nation, that should be impacted by Christ as King. And I think that view fits better with the overall data of Scripture from the Old Testament story to the New Testament. Whereas I think you could kind of derive a Gnostic kind of sacred secular dichotomy by picking a few things here and there and putting them together, stringing them together. But I don't think, and it's oddly enough, to go back to the last passage he mentioned, the Great Commission, to me is a perfect encapsulation of what Sandlin's talking about.
Yeah.
All authority in heaven, all rule on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and not just make converts, but make disciples of the nations. And this is how he explains, even like notes what that means, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded. What has he commanded? Well, a lot of what he commanded was looking back at what he gave, and the Father, Son, Holy Spirit gave through the law as well, of what the good life looks like, of what it means to love your neighbor, of what it means to do justice in the city. And so that's kind of the argument, I think, of the Reformed Kuyperians. And I just think it's good to note, like when you're thinking about like kind of John MacArthur theology, which is it's not just limited to him. It's very, very much spread through the church, of this is not our home. So I don't need to, it's like a rental house at best. Like you just use it to do the important work, but I don't really have to take care of it. I don't really have to care about those kinds of things. So anyways, hopefully that's helpful. And we'll keep on chopping it up. Subscribe to whatever you're listening to, just so you know when new stuff comes out, and we'll see you next time.
Blessings.